I'm pleased to be joined from Southwest China's Yunnan province by David Blair, Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization, a think tank. From Beijing by He Ping, Associate Dean of the School of Economics and Management at Tsinghua University. And here in the studio by Rong Ying, Senior Research Fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. Gentlemen, the warmest welcome to all of you. Let's start with a very basic, foundation, the context of what we are looking at. And I'm going to go to Mr. Rong here. This plan period is referred to as a critical stage in building on past successes to break new ground for basically realizing socialist modernization. A mouthful. Help us translate this.
Well, I think it is true. I think we have 2 sessions every year, and this is, I would say, in normal sense, it's an annual sort of event, big event for China's development, and for the world, as I would argue. But this one is different. This different is because it is at this year session we are going to formulate the plan for we call the 5-year plan for the next 5 years, and this is going to be the beginning of that 15th 5-year plan, based on the proposals that has been put forward by the Communist Party of China back in October last year. And it is also important because I think this 5-year plan going to take place in a very, I think, sort of complicated context, both at home and abroad. At home, I'm not going to deliberate more because we have economists and we have such a big, great panel. At abroad, we have, just as I think our host talked about, we have such a turbulent, uncertain world, ongoing conflicts, and the uncertainties about these conflicts and the changes of the world situation, which all complicate China's sort of development strategy. The last point I will make is that China has, being a big power, being a developing power, has always played a very important role, not only in terms of its own economic development, which I think is a big contributor worldly, economically, but also as I think sort of a stabilizing force for this uncertain and volatile world. Last but not least, China also tried its best, strive to be the safeguard of the international order based on rule,
Right.
not based on fair.
Let's talk to that. Let's turn to that in just a moment. But let's first focus on what China is trying to stay focused on, which is growth, which is economy. And David, I want to turn to you there. Now, during the previous 5-year plan, which is the 14th, which ends in 2025, China's economy has been stepping up one level almost every year. For instance, by the end of last year, we achieved the total GDP of over 140 trillion yuan. That is some 20 trillion US dollars. Over the entire 5-year period, actually, China's added GDP amounted to that, to the whole economy of Japan or India. So, Blair, on what basis are we stepping into the next cycle, first of all? And secondly, what are some of the growth targets we can expect for the year 2026, for instance, if not for the whole next 5 years?
I think the most important thing to realize about China's economy today is that it's in a transition between an old growth model and a newer growth model. It's had a very successful growth model. In the last 25 years, China's real wages have multiplied by more than 8 times, fundamentally transforming the lifestyle of average Chinese people. It's important that these are median real wages. This is the wages to the average person. And the way it's done that is partly through having a highly competitive economy. If you look compare it with the U.S. economy, in just about every sector, the Chinese economy is twice as competitive. I mean, it has twice as many firms competing in every sector. So competitiveness is part of it. And part of it was large investments, especially large investments in infrastructure and large investments in housing. And that's improved people's lives. But that kind of growth model has reached its culmination. I mean, we've reached the point where further investments probably are not going to pay off in the way they have in the past. So I think it's important that China to realize we're in a transition. We're not in a Keynesian kind of short-term shock. And the transition, I think China has two strengths going forward, two big strengths that the government has recognized. One is the common prosperity, that because it's important to focus on wages, not on GDP, because to make people consume more, they have to get richer. They have to have higher wages. And it's also important to transition toward an economy that's China's historic economy. I think if you look in the West and in the rural areas, there's a long tradition of small businesses, being farmers having a farm and also having a small business, being highly productive over time, going all the way back to the Song Dynasty, maybe back to the Han Dynasty. The other part is China is very good at applying technology, not just developing the technology, applying it.
Yeah.
And the China's known for its clusters of highly integrated supply chains, small businesses, large businesses that apply clusters very quickly. They maintain what's called the speed of China. Okay. So I think those are the two things to focus on going forward.
Very interesting, but I have been told that we are joined from Portland, the United States, by Liang Yan Kramer Chair, Professor Willamette University. Professor Liang Yan, thanks as always for joining us. But I want to first go to Mr. He Ping, because he has been with us since the beginning of the discussion. Mr. He, how do you look at the transition that will continue in the next 5 years? Now, China has listed several priorities. For instance, real economy, innovation, science and technology, continuing reform, opening up, the well-being of the people, and so on and so forth. But the number one priority, according to the recommendations that were reached last year, at the end of last year, is real economy. We will upgrade traditional industries, foster emerging industries, industries of the future, promote high quality, efficient development in the service sector, and develop a modernized infrastructure system. Why the great emphasis on real economy?
I think over the past 20 years also, we actually there are some problems emerged in Chinese economy. For example, the overdevelopment in real estate, which generating a housing bubble in the economy. In the short run, it does bring GDP to the economy, but also bring financial problems in the system. So in the future, we'll control this financial turbulence generated by real estate sector, that with a focus on real economy, in particular, with a focus on innovation, scientific innovation. The resource is always limited in economy. Once all the resources flow into real estate, it does limit the capital or the resource flowing into the scientific research and innovation. So focusing on the real economy means we have to make a control on kind of financial bubble like real estate sector. So that's something that we should be aware of.
Professor Liang Yan, how do you look at the second in line of China's priorities, which is innovation? And we're seeing key words such as quantum technology, biomanufacturing, brain-computer interfaces, embodied AI, and 6G mobile communications. What is China eyeing from this year on?
Well, I think that China's goal here is to develop a self-reliance in technologies. So as you mentioned earlier, all these sectors, right, they are emerging and futuristic industries, and they hold a lot of potentials when it comes to market demands, when it comes to promoting the general economic productivity growth. So that is essential that China is able to develop these technologies domestically to strengthen the kind of self-reliance on these technologies. And second, I think it's very important that these technologies be integrated into the broader economy. So for instance, for AI, China's AI Plus strategy, which was launched last year, with the goal to promote AI integration into 90% of the economy by 2030. So this is, again, important in the sense that it's not just about technological breakthroughs and innovations, but really how you have the deep integration of technologies into the domestic economy. And so that is the key for China's productivity-driven, the new quality productive forces-driven kind of growth. And last but not the least, I think it's also essential to understand that there are, chokeholds, I would say, in the technological developments, right? So in terms of, for example, some of the lithographic machinery for China's semiconductor industries, and also when it comes to biotechnologies, there are some core technologies that are still not being well developed in China. So I think that is the goal, to localize a lot of these core components and core technologies within China. So that's both for economic development and also, I would say, national security as dual goals going forward.
Mr. Rong Ying, the outside press, the Western press in particular, have been fixated on China must expand its domestic consumption, whereas if you look at the guideline that is to be examined, actually consumption comes in third after real economy, after sci-tech innovation, then is the emphasis to lift consumption. What is China's logic here?
Well, the logic is that I think the old model or old sort of way of development is not working. And this is become a consensus, which I think known to all. The policymakers are here is, as we have as we are discussing, that need to transit or shift the economic development, and the social development model in a way that it would be balanced, become more balanced. I think the so-called 3-year sort of driving forces, the investment and the foreign trade and domestic consumption has to be more and more balanced. But in the case of China, I think the top priority at the moment, I'm not an economist, I will confess, my understanding is the priority has to be on domestic consumption. But to do that, we need to do a lot of work. That's exactly the reason I think functions like particularly for this year's two sessions are important. The proposals, I think the recommendation has already formulated, known to all, and it's been repeated by top leadership and also the various leaders, the local government.
It's public available.
Yeah, it's available.
Yeah.
How to implement, how to follow this shift to ensure the transition shift is smooth and will continuously help China to achieve development. That is most important.
Well, since we talk about mechanism, I want to, popularize a little bit exactly how these kind of 5-year plans is formulated. As we mentioned, the recommendations that were kind of passed in meetings of the Communist Party of China have already been passed at the end of last year. But now we're seeing the two sessions, which is the top legislature and at the top political advisory body. So I want to go to Mr. He Ping there. How about international audiences understand how this big machine works in terms of drafting policy and making sure that the grand plan for the next 5 years on the national level is broken down on operables for the local governments on a year-to-year basis?
And it's a quite complex process to have this kind of 5-year plan being stipulated. I think it's a collection of advices and the suggestions from a large group of experts in every sector, including entrepreneurs as well as scholars and maybe government officials as well. And so it's a
and the grassroots.
it's a full, indeed. And it's a collection of the suggestions from all kinds of people with their own understanding of the economy in their own domain, and also a full information about the economic outlook over the long run and the short run. So in terms of implementation, this plan will be divided into like annual plan every year. Also, we'll divide it by region, so then the plan can be implemented. Also, at the macro level, the government will have some guidance on the future industry. I mean, in terms of the industrial policy, and then in implementation, the fiscal policy and the monetary policy will also be in coordination with this implementation of the industry policy.
Yeah, David, help us understand your understanding of the process. I mean, it is the task of this year's national legislature, for instance, to examine a draft guideline of the next 5-year plans. So exactly what's going to happen over the next week and two, and how is that going to be implemented in the next 5 years?
Well, the thing that I can contribute most is I want to contrast China's economic policy with the U.S. economic policy. I think it's important that China not fall into some of the traps the United States has over the last 40 years.
Oh, please, tell us about it. Yeah.
The U.S. has had, China's median real wages have increased 8 times, as I said, since 2000. The U.S. has had basically zero increase in median real wages since 1979, when the data starts. And I want to talk about why. First of all, there's a lot of talk I hear about consumption, but I think we need to be careful what we mean by consumption. If consumption is created by real increases in people's productivity and their wages, that's a very good thing. If it's created by either more consumer credit, which is unsustainable in the long term, or by entitlement programs that create a long-term and multi-generational entitlement mentality, that's a very bad thing. So I think China, I would focus on, if I had to look at one number, I would look at wages rather than at GDP. The other thing is we talk about innovation, we talk about talent. Those are important. But I think it's important to realize there are other kinds of talent than just sort of high-end scientific talent. Mm-hmm. There are many smart people all around the country, well, all around the world, mm-hmm. who are capable of innovating. They create a small business. It's not technologically innovative, but it employs 20 people, say. It creates a much better life. And when you get millions of them, that's a very good thing. Mm-hmm. And what China is really good at is implementing the technological innovation through the clusters, especially in Zhejiang and Guangdong province, but now all around the country. Yeah. And the third thing I want to talk about is policy. The United States has repeatedly tried to solve its economic problems by highly stimulative monetary and fiscal policy. Mm-hmm. Especially, we reformed our banking system in reformed, I put that in quotes, we reformed our banking system in the 1990s to move it away from emphasis on the real economy to emphasis on more speculative economy and consumer credit.
Yeah.
And what we did is we had the Federal Reserve created a boom in the 2000s that created the housing crisis of 2008.
Well, I think, yeah.
Let me just finish this point.
Yeah.
Instead of reforming the economy, which we should have done then, we created another boom, which is purely an asset-based boom. All it did was increase the price of houses and stocks and did not create any real value.
I think China has
not done that.
Yeah, I think China has
that.
been learning the lessons, and the voluntary busting of the real estate bubble, for instance, which has been really painful, and the continued emphasis on the real economy. But really interesting points. Wages, you mentioned, for instance, and on every economic data release, the increase of wages are a very important barometer, only that we didn't mention here, but I think it is on the mind of the Chinese leadership. Anyway, while we're talking about the plans that are being finalized, we are profoundly aware of the profound and intricate changes facing China's development environment. And by that, I mean, of course, the ongoing and potentially escalating conflict in Iran. Let's talk a little bit about the latest, because without that, we won't be able to focus, and probably it's going to affect China's priorities going forward. And I'm going to mention what Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said during a phone call upon the request by Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon, which happened yesterday. Wang Yi said that China opposes the military strikes launched by Israel and the United States against Iran. China says the use of force cannot truly resolve the issue. Instead, it will create new problems and grave repercussions. The true value of military strength lies not on the battlefield, but in preventing war. And China calls for an immediate cessation of military operations to prevent the conflict from further escalating and spiraling out of control. Mr. Wang Yi, how do you read China's words, how strong it is, and what exactly is China opposed to here?
Definitely, I think the past few days, I think 5 days since the military strikes against Iran by United States and Israel, is a very, I think, dangerous and sort of development as far as China's own. I mean, we're talking about China's development, the international situation, and so on and so forth. That's why we've seen, I think, unprecedented Chinese diplomacy, both in terms of statements and also and other bilateral and multilateral levels. So the telephone conversation with the Israel Foreign Minister is just one of the diplomacy that China has been. They've been just missing back yesterday. Was it yesterday or the day before? The foreign minister also had a phone conversation with the Iranian foreign ministers, expressing its principled positions on that. First and foremost, China has been resolutely opposed and strong condemn the military actions that has been caused, and which is now, I seem to expanding and looks likely may spray out of control. That is very much sort of dangerous development. Secondly, I think China has made it very clear that the solution for disputes or international or regional hotspot like that has to be resolved through negotiations. And last but not least, I think all the countries, international countries, should unite together, work together fight against the unilateral unilateral gesture like that, because nobody want to. I think, including the United States and Israel, want to see the world come return to the law of jungle.
Some people have been asking what role can China play. I'm going to go to Professor He Ping. Mr. Wang Yi said that China has consistently upheld a just position on Middle East issues and will continue to play a constructive role in promoting de-escalation. What specifically can China do here?
First of all, China has already done is make it clear that they were against this hegemonism as well as this kind of rule of jungles. And secondly, I think that China can actually communicate with more countries to advocate this concept of resolving issues through dialogue and consultation, as China has always suggested, and make sure that more people will having the same idea about how to resolve this kind of issues. And thirdly, I think maybe in the long run, I think to resolve these issues, I think we should have this mechanism being designed. When this kind of military intrusion, military strikes occurred, what other countries should do instead of joining them to intrude other countries, what kind of a mechanism should be designed? I think that's China should think about in the long run.
Professor Liang Yan, how do you see the situation affecting potentially China's priorities of this year going forward? Do you think China has foreseen this kind of uncertainties while drafting the national development plans?
Well, I think China's position has been always very clear that China needs to safeguard its own national sovereignty and territorial integrity, and China does not have formal security alliances with any countries but North Korea. So I don't think China will in any ways to militarily intervene, especially China does not believe in this idea of escalation to de-escalate. So I agree with what has been said. But I think domestically, China would always focus on what is doing the best and what is the most important for itself, which is to develop its own domestic economy. But that said, I do think that this kinds of volatile international environments will at least push China to focus on three more things. One is, again, technological self-reliance. Second is energy security. And third is to uphold still the multilateral trading system. For example, I think this conflict will really have a material impact on international energy markets and also shipping and trade routes. And so I think China will continue to focus on those areas to really, I think, safeguard its own interests, but also try to provide the kind of stability and multilateral system for the global economy as well.
Okay. Well, we have to leave it there, but definitely just thinking about one country's interests does not work, right? The stability is good for all and instability is bad for all. For the time being, we have to leave it there. Many thanks to my panelists, David Blair, Vice President at the Center for China and Globalization, He Ping, Associate Dean of the School of Economics and Management of Tsinghua University, Liang Yan, Kramer Chair Professor of Economics at Willamette University, and Rong Ying, Senior Research Fellow at the China Institute of International Studies.